Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. In this week's episode, we are discussing the principles of location sharing, along with a bit about destroying prints and sizing for prints. And there's also something that I have to admit. Let's dive right into it, shall we? So I have something to confess to you here, Ben.
And what is that?
So you know how I was telling you last week that the backpacking trip was not going to happen?
Oh, yeah?
Well, it did.
It did?
It did, yes.
Wow.
So I texted my buddy a little bit after I got done recording. He came over and we were talking, and we wanted to play it by the weather. Weren't sure how that was going to pan out. And so we made it a sort of compromise.
Mm-hmm.
There's a park that we had visited up by the property. It's maybe an hour west of my family's cabin. And I said to him, why don't we just go there? We go up to the cabin. We bring all of our stuff for backpacking. We stay Friday night at the cabin, and then Saturday morning after we get a good breakfast, we go from there when we want to during the day, to dependent on weather and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then we, do our thing. And so we just left the truck overnight by the visitor center, registered it, and hit the trail from there. I mean, it didn't go exactly as well as we hoped in terms of we didn't really follow the trail how we planned to.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it was nice. I mean, at nighttime, we definitely weren't prepared for the drop from about 70 degrees to like 42.
Oh, yeah.
So that was quite cold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially to be sleeping in a hammock.
Oh, yeah. So I got a question about that. So when I have slept in a hammock for one night when I went on a backpacking trip, and it probably got to be a similar temperature. And I know that insulation is very important, so I tried to use my sleeping pad underneath me. It didn't work, so I just got rid of it, and I just curled up into a ball and shivered for most of the night. So I'm curious what your setup was in terms of, did you try to have any sort of insulation like underneath you or anything like that?
We really didn't have anything we didn't even really bring anything with us that would have helped with that. So it was on the trip, it was my girlfriend and I, along with my buddy and his girlfriend. And my girlfriend and I shared a hammock, and we brought with us just one blanket.
Uh-huh.
And it covered us. It would have been fine had the temperatures stayed like even closer to the 50s, but we didn't have anything underneath us, and that's what really killed us. Plus, when I first got into the hammock, I was in shorts and a t-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
That lasted all of about 2 hours before I put my sweatshirt on, and I didn't have anything besides the blanket for my legs. So to say that we were ill prepared for this is an understatement, at least for the night.
Yeah, that's something that you learn very quickly. You don't really think about that too much, because you think, oh, if I'm sleeping on the ground, that's gonna be cold. But if I'm sleeping in a hammock, that's not gonna be too bad. It's all nice in there. But then you realize that the air is just stealing away all your warmth from your back.
Yeah.
So that couldn't have been nice after a little while.
Every 2 hours we woke up shivering.
Oh.
I mean, the nice thing though was when I woke up, I think it was around like 2:00. I guess my buddy and his girlfriend in their hammock had woken up too, and we heard at first what sounded like coyotes, like yipping and bantering back and forth.
Yeah.
But then as you listen to it closer, it was two owls that were going back and forth, which is really cool. I've
Yeah.
never personally I've never been up when the owls are, and to hear them going back and forth doing whatever they're doing. That was an experience. That was worth it. But
That's cool.
yeah, but next time we definitely need to prepare better. I mean, even my buddy, because him and his girlfriends had two separate hammocks and they were going to sleep individually, but because of how cold it got down to, they ended up staying in one. And he had an emergency blanket that they put underneath him at some point during the night, and then he had I think they each had a blanket, so they had two blankets on top of them. And he went so far as to wear his girlfriend's leggings because his pants were wet from the hike because of it raining, and he only had shorts as well then. So he was in his girlfriend's leggings and everything, and just trying to put as many layers that were warm on, and even still they were both really cold. So yeah, it didn't help either. The hammocks were just above like a bunch of mossy, wet ground. So all of that like moisture and all of that like cool air was just stuck there and bringing up onto our backs. Yeah. But I don't regret it. I still can't wait to do it again.
Well, that's the way to learn right there. And I mean, when I went on my recent backpacking trip, this was the first time in a while that I brought a tent with me. Because in the past I would just have a bivy, which is just a bag. Basically, you put the sleeping bag in, and it's got a little screen portion over your face, so you can, you look up at the stars, but you don't eat bugs. So,
yeah.
Pros and cons. But there was something about the experience of having the hammock or not the hammock, but the bivy, where it was very convenient. I could just store my sleeping bag, my sleeping pad, everything inside the bivy, roll it up, and just stuff it in the bottom of my backpack. And that was really convenient because you get to camp and you literally just take the thing out of your backpack, you unfurl it on the ground, and camp is basically set up.
Yeah, cowboy camping.
Yeah, it worked really, really well, but also not having that clean indoor sort of space where you can have some degree of a separation from your surroundings at night that gives just that extra sense of comfort. I will say that having the tent on this trip was quite nice, and it weighs about the same as the bivy did, which is good.
Yeah, that's nice.
But yeah, having something to keep you warm in terms of some degree of insulation from the ground or from the hammock. I mean, that definitely is an important lesson. And on this trip, I used it's a new blow up sleeping pad from Thermarest called the Uber Light, which is very lightweight. It's very comfy, but even that, when it got down to probably the low 40s, I mean, I could definitely feel it sucking a little bit of the warmth away from me during the course of the night.
Yeah.
So what are you planning on doing as far as future trips in terms of the sleeping setup?
We started looking at lightweight tents, essentially, because I mean, if the two of us go out for something for like this, or the four of us again, I know that we can sleep in confined area. Like, it doesn't have to have much more room than what the hammock did for us to be comfortable. So that's always a plus, because then we can get something that's a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact in terms of a tent. So we were looking at some of those and thinking about it here and there. I don't think it's going to be a purchase until later on in the season, more towards like August, September, just because for the Smokies, we already have a tent that we don't have to really worry about like having it lightweight or anything. But
yeah,
I think that's an option. Other than that, though, I kind of like how we had, like, I enjoy the hammock because you don't have to worry about flat ground. You don't have to worry about, as long as you have two trees that are close enough together, you can just quick put it up. So I think it's just a matter of finding some lightweight sleeping bags maybe that we can just carry along with us, and having those where we either sleep in them or even just underneath of us.
Yeah.
That can help to keep us warmer. But I think really that's, other than that, I don't know what else, in terms of sleeping at least, we would really change.
Yeah, because the night that I spent in the hammock, I had a pretty good sleeping bag, REI brand, the Igneo. I think it's rated for like 15 degrees or 20 degrees or something along those lines. But even at that, like without some sort of padding beneath me, it would just suck the warmth right out of my back. So, but I'm sure there's some good solutions for doing that. But the thought of carrying the hammock nice and lightweight, pretty flexible as far as where to set it up, especially in an area with a lot of trees, that sounds pretty good. I would imagine there wasn't much in the way of crowds when you were out there.
No, I mean, we passed by a couple of different people, and like I said, we originally had this trail that was going to be an 18-mile loop. It said on the website where I found it to go counterclockwise instead of clockwise around this loop, and to camp at this little pond that was in about 8 miles. And that was originally our plan, that we'd go do the 8 miles to this pond and then come back some, camp there, and then do the rest coming back to the truck on Sunday. Because we didn't want to do too much hiking. We didn't know, at least here there was a lot of elevation gains that we were doing, so we didn't get a ton of miles in.
Yeah.
And we just wanted it to be less of miles, more of just the experience of it altogether.
Yeah.
And along this counterclockwise trail, there was at least 2, including the pond, like established campsites along it that we wanted to hit and sleep at. But like I said, it didn't end up happening that way. So when we went, we ended up going clockwise accidentally and turned into a mess. And we saw maybe 3 or 4 groups, 5 maybe along, but not a lot. It was more, once we got into like the actual Loyalsock Trail, there really weren't many people at all.
That's pretty impressive, given that was Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah.
And you'd think that there'd be, even some of the areas that aren't as popular, you'd think that there would still be, but maybe that was, heavy trail traffic for that area or something along those lines.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind too is, as we were passing by, because this state park has established campsites as well.
Yeah.
So those, from the looks of it, were like packed.
Oh, okay.
So where these people were along these trails, I just don't think was where we were going.
Got it.
So if we would have picked another trail or just gone to this park for a day hike and picked somewhere else to go, I think we would have run into a lot more people. But because we were kind of along a trail that's known for through hiking and backpacking, it's kind of like, okay, I'm not going to bother with that for a nice weekend.
And that reminds me a little bit of when I went to the Redwoods last year. I ended up being there on Memorial Day weekend, but I wasn't even thinking of that when I was, booking the campsite 6 months in advance, which is when you're able to start, the booking the stuff. And I didn't even realize it was Memorial Day weekend. But the beautiful thing about the Redwoods is that, there were cars on the road. There was people going from place to place, but the moment you step foot on a trail that wasn't a main trail, like, you wouldn't see anyone. So
we even saw that in Acadia. I mean,
yeah.
Last year, and most of the trips that I take happen to be right around like Memorial Day weekend. And this for the Smokies is just a massive change, pushing it towards the end of June. But even like up in Acadia, we didn't see much of anyone. I mean, the campgrounds were getting crowded, but not abundantly. And even the trails were like here and there. Yeah, there were more people, but not terrible.
Well, that's good. And that also, I mean, that's certainly one of the reasons why, when there are these areas that we find to be very special, these quiet areas away from people, it's definitely why it's important to be very mindful in terms of, sharing, location sharing and all that sort of stuff online, because Man, can you imagine how horrible it'd be to head back to one of those areas that was previously nice, and then to see it discovered by the crowds. So I think it should be a little bit of a reminder for anyone listening, just to be mindful of the impact of what can happen to some of these areas if they are discovered.
Yeah. And I mean, you got to consider the impact that even just telling one person and sharing that location with just one person has. And now all of a sudden, if you take a photograph of this amazing rock formation and you location tag it, all of a sudden, if it's online, it's not just, doesn't have the potential to reach just your, say, 100 followers. It has the potential to reach each one of your followers' followers as well, if they share it or start talking about it or whatever. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, it went from being seen by 100 people to 1 million people, and now that rock formation no longer exists. I've heard that story far too many times.
Yeah. Do you remember during the pandemic when the, quote, mysterious monolith appeared in Utah?
Yeah.
It's kind of a microcosm for what happens to places once they are, discovered. And I had zero desire to go there, but I did hear from some people that were already in the area and they went there, and just the amount of social trails that were created, areas that became parking areas, and just influx of large numbers of people. Yeah, stuff like that. When I see stuff like that, it helps reassure me that keeping some of these areas close to the chest is a good thing, just to preserve them for even for the selfish reasons, so that we can go back to them and enjoy them in peace, but obviously more so that other people who happen to know there, go there, they can still have that wonderful experience, and so the location itself doesn't get destroyed. But I was also thinking, so while you were doing that last weekend, I had a little bit of a different experience. So what are your thoughts on Marie Kondo and the thought of clearing out things that don't bring you joy and all that sort of stuff?
I'm not familiar with Marie Kondo.
You're not familiar. So she, and I have only a very surface level knowledge, but her whole thing is that people build up so much junk and so much clutter, and it has a very negative impact. And so by going through all the stuff that we have and essentially asking ourselves, does this particular item, bring me joy? If not, then why is it there?
Okay.
And so she's almost become a little bit of a meme in terms of, throwing away stuff, getting rid of stuff. And so that's what came to mind as I was going through a process this past weekend where I had these face mounts of photos that were produced, had to have been in 2012, maybe 2011, 2012, and also some older framed images. And I know that you had a rather negative experience doing an art show.
Yes.
And you had mentioned that a few episodes back. And so did you end up having a large inventory of framed pieces as a result of that?
They're sitting in my basement.
Ah.
Yeah. And that includes 2 face mounts and then a bunch of loose prints and some framed pieces. And the third face mount is on my wall. So, yeah.
So you're very familiar with the expense involved.
Oh, yes.
And seeing that they're face mounts, how big are we talking on some of those?
2 20 by 40s and 1 40 by 50.
Okay. So I had a very similar experience to doing art shows. I first did one in 2009, and my last one was just before my wife and I got married in 2012. And I knew that that would be the last one because it just nothing good was coming from it, and I felt the need to produce a new framed piece or a new face mount or something before each of those shows. And I built up this inventory. Was it only one show that you did, or did you do multiple?
I did multiple. It was all throughout the summer of 2019. I think I did maybe 10 shows.
Okay, so that's probably more than I did cumulatively through the years, because there's 2 shows I do on some years, but it was from 2009 through 2012. And our perception certainly changes on our own work, and maybe for some of the people that are listening to this and they're not familiar with what a face mount is. So you have oftentimes a relatively large photographic print, and then it is mounted with clear acrylic to the front of it, a backing board of some sort to the back of it, and then it's all basically laminated together. And then in my case, they'd put a wood frame on the back just for structure. They're these very large pieces. They are less expensive to produce than a traditionally framed photo of the size, but everything's encased in plastic. And if you decide at some point you don't like that photo, you're just out a lot of money.
Yeah, you can't do anything about it. There's no way to get the print back. Like, you can't take the glass or the acrylic off of the print because it's glued there. You'll destroy the print.
Yeah, it's permanently bonded to it. And also, these prints were made by a local lab back before I had my big printer. And so my experience working with a lab was that I was never 100% satisfied with the end result. I might be 90%, 95%, but I'd never be 100%. Because at a certain point, you're looking at the big print. It's most of the way there, but I don't want to be like, yeah, we got to redo this. We got to redo this over and over. It was when you had your prints made, was it the same sort of thing where you're going through a lab, and did you work with them in person, or was it an online thing? Or
I went through a lab out in I can't remember where it is now. Nevada, maybe?
Okay.
So definitely not in person.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I think I got lucky with them in regard to, they sent me a couple test prints before doing the actual face mount acrylic, and I was okay with them.
Well, that's good.
I also didn't have as much or as high of a standard as I do for my work now as I did 3 years ago. So that's also changed. But
now, if you look at those prints, what's your reaction if you look at the face mounts now?
I'm actually happy with the 20 by 40s. I mean, I'm happy enough to have the one hanging on my wall, so that has to say something.
Yeah.
The 40 by 50, though, the image itself was one of my favorites that I had taken, but it was also one of my first that I had taken with film, with like medium format film.
Mm-hmm.
So it was massively overexposed. And of course I could bring it back, but I got it drum scanned because at that size you really almost have to.
Yeah.
And to bring it back, if you look close at the piece, you can almost see, like, I'd almost describe them as like hash marks throughout it, just because of how much I had to bring it back and how thin the negative itself was. So yeah, there's and a 40 by 50 piece, you're not looking at super close up anyway, so it's fine as is. But it's one of those deals of like, I wouldn't have even bothered to print that piece at all had I taken it like this year.
And that's along the lines of my experience. So the one I had a 40 by 50 face mount of, it's a photo I really do like. It's just I overly edited that photo, and it was losing detail in the highlights. It was falling apart. I can print that same image now on my Epson, and it looks absolutely beautiful because everything is technically fine with the image. I just gone crazy with the processing, and I just didn't even want to look at it. And so a little while back, I went through a process where there were some of these images that were still just fine. I'm still quite happy with them. And I actually gave those away. So there's 3, a panorama, I think it was a 20 by 24, I think 2 20 by 24 prints. And all of those were framed ones. So I found homes for those. I simply gave them away to some photographers I know. And so those are ones I was still happy with looking at, but it just didn't really fit into anywhere on the walls in my own house. And these had been sitting in my garage. They'd just been up against the wall in the garage. There's, some spiders living in there. It's my wife during the past 6 months or so, she's gone through the process of repainting her car in the garage. And so I'm sure that there's like some little droplets of stuff that have kind of, microscopically ended up on them where it's maybe not quite as clear of plexiglass as it used to be. So 3 of them I gave away, but the other ones, I just was tired of looking at them. So I took a reciprocating saw and I cut up the face mount, which was surprisingly easy to do.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it was a Fujiflex print. There's a pretty sizable piece of acrylic over the front of it, and then there was more plastic on the back of it, and it was just like this sandwich of plastic, and I cut it up into 3 pieces, and I gotta say it was oddly therapeutic to cut it into pieces, and it was on trash day, so I could just toss it right out in the trash. And it just disappeared. But it just struck me as so much of a waste, because even though I made that face mount probably back in 2012, I'm pretty sure it was like $800 or so to make it. So I still remember that number.
Yep, right in line with mine.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but also it's a lot of plastic. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really got away from doing the face mounts. Not only the fact that I don't think it's the best way to display a photo. There's no transition to the room versus a framed image that has the mat in the frame, which transitions the image to the surrounding wall that it's being hung on. And short of being hung perhaps in a ultra modern, like a contemporary home with perhaps cement walls and all that sort of stuff, I could see the face mounts looking really nice there. But in an average home, it's really tough to hang those in a way that feels natural.
They have their place and they have their time.
Yeah.
And
they do. And I just find that even like in my own house, like I had, I was just trying to think, like, if I did want to keep this, if I was happy with this image, it just wouldn't fit on any of my walls.
No.
But I will say that the process of firing up the reciprocating saw, cutting it into pieces and tossing it, it was almost as though it was a pivotal moment where you can take past work and the simple act of destroying it really kind of marks that pivotal moment in terms of, that was then, this is now, and looking back at that. And I also destroyed a few framed pieces as well. And even though, yes, technically I could have put another image in that frame, once I started tearing apart one of them, I realized it wasn't all that great of a frame anyways. It was not as nice as I thought it was. So now that I mentioned this, what are your thoughts with the piece sitting in your garage?
I would absolutely love to see it uh, hanging in someone's home.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if anyone listening wants a 40 by 50 face mount acrylic,
They're going to have to live close to you.
yeah, because that shipping cost is, yeah.
Oh, it'd be insane.
Anyone in Pennsylvania, preferably around like Philadelphia area, maybe? By all means, I'll drive to you for the most part. But I would love to see that. But at the same time, like you said, just the cost of trying to ship that and finding the right person, because believe me, it was a favorite photograph of mine, but even when I had ordered it and it got here, my parents were like, why that one? Like, why, who is going to want a photograph of ferns that big in their home? And especially because of being in Pennsylvania, we don't have a ton of like super big houses with big walls that are going to fit that. Like you were saying, that 40 by 50 doesn't have a place in this house at all that it can fit on. Maybe like one wall, but then you're moving like furniture and stuff around, and you're literally centralizing the room around that piece. So, yeah, and I think there's only one or two photographs that are still a part of my portfolio from the prints that I have downstairs from these art shows. So they're not even pieces that I'm like as happy with anymore. But I hate to see I just spent all of that money on these pieces 3 years ago, and all of that waste, especially for nothing. So I think that's the only thing that's really keeping me from doing as you did and just going down there with a reciprocating saw and a hammer and match and just lighting it all up.
Yeah. I did use a crowbar as well because I was trying to pry the wooden frame off the back of it.
Yeah.
So it was a rather violent end for that face mount. But it sounds like you've had a transition more toward smaller prints.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, so back when I was doing these shows, I had this like obsession with large prints. I thought, oh, large prints are really going to show their value. They're going to really show the piece off as best as possible, that kind of thing. And a lot of the photographers that I was following at the time were doing large pieces. So I was heavily influenced by them. But more recently, I've kind of been of the mindset of like looking around right now around my desk. I have a bunch of like 8x10 prints hanging up on the wall. And they're from photographers that I admire, and some are my own pieces and that kind of deal. But just the small, intimate sized prints are really, I don't know, there's something about them. Like the fact that you can hold them in your hand, that you can look at them close and see all the detail, and then you can put them on a wall and they still hold their own, is something that's really interested me. But with that comes the whole idea of like value.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't really ask $250 from someone for a print that's smaller than some photography books. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, if I'm only asking $35, $50 for it, is it being seen as too cheap for it? And then you have to wonder, like, are you just pandering to what you think your audience is going to want? Because I mean, Edward Weston only really did 8x10 prints, 8x10 contact prints his entire career. So if they're sizable enough for him, then why couldn't they be for me? And there's another photographer who's Jack Lowe. He is doing a lifeboat station project on glass plate. And he has the original 10x12 glass plate, but he's only offering prints of that same size, even though he could very easily scan that glass plate and get 40 by 50 prints out of it.
Yeah.
So,
Do you
yeah.
do you happen to know how Edward Weston priced his work? Like I have no knowledge of that whatsoever. I don't know if it was reasonable or if it was very high, certainly toward perhaps the end of his career. But do you have any knowledge on that?
I'm not 100% positive. I know that he was around the, what was it, $25 mark, $25, $50 mark, somewhere around
Really?
that. Maybe he started closer to around $10 for him, which you have to
Oh,
keep
wow.
in mind. This was back in the mid 1900s.
Yeah, but even so.
So, I mean, at that time, if you account for inflation with that, you're looking at about $250.
Yeah. Okay.
So, seeing that, but then you also, I mean, personally, I couldn't imagine spending $250 on an 8x10 print. So I think that's what gets me too. Is if I can't see spending that much money on a print like that, how could I see my audience doing it as well?
Yeah, though I'll also say that your experience currently is that you are, working your way through your masters in college, and certainly the that perspective changes a little bit with time. When I gotta think when I was in my early 20s, about the only income I had from photography is that there's a store in La Jolla, which is along the coast here in San Diego, and it was called the Cave Store. And through the entrance of the store, there's a tunnel you can go down, and then you drop down quite a ways, and then you emerge into this sea cave. And that was the whole thing about the store. There were some novelties and stuff that they would sell within the store itself, but part of it was, you pay, I don't know, a few bucks or whatever it was to have access to go down into that sea cave. And I had some photos that I shot both in there as well as kind of in the surrounding area. And one time I dropped by the cave store and presented a few that were, I think they were 5x7 prints. They were matted. There was a backing board to them, and then it was in a plastic sleeve. And if I remember right, I think I just gave them a few saying, hey, see how these sell. Here's some price points, and then give me a call, And then for the course of it, at least one summer, maybe a little longer than that, they would sell through them. I'd bring them more of them and all that. And I don't think the price points were very high because it was for a kind of a touristy sort of market. But that stuff certainly added up, and it would be absolutely fascinating if there is anyone that ever listens to this that happens to have one of those old, cave store images hanging somewhere. That'd be kind of trippy if the person's sitting there looking at it right now going like, hey,
Yeah,
I didn't know who that was from.
that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. But that was my experience when I had to have been in my early 20s when I was doing that. And at that point in time, the thought of spending, $250 or so on an 8x10, it would seem, it wouldn't even cross my mind. It would, like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But I will say that now with where I am, I'm, 40 years old now. I look at people that are buying some of the prints that I sell with full knowledge that the frame that they're going to buy is going to cost more than the print, which is something that we talked a little bit about in a past episode.
Right.
So personally, I don't think $250 is too high of a price point. It's probably honestly more of a normal price point, but you have to also look at the issue of volume versus if you're selling a lot more of them at a lesser price point, that might make up for that in the end.
I mean, I even look at Michael Kenna too.
Mm-hmm.
He's selling 8x8 prints almost exclusively for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, whatever it is. And people are, I mean, he's not like a top selling artist, but he's still making it pretty good as a full-time artist. But I think that also goes for what kind of audience you build too.
Yeah.
So like for your audience in particular, and I think it's going to be much similar to mine, that you would say that it's primarily made up of other photographers.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's where I kind of have a bit more issue when it comes to pricing pretty high with some of my work, because I think I'm a photographer. I know how difficult it is to make a living doing this. And even though a lot of other people are more likely to be working full-time jobs and that kind of thing to supplement their own, now you have to think, well, now am I going to buy a new lens or am I going to buy a print?
Yeah.
Especially at the higher prices. And like I said, I think that's where right now I'm in between the idea of doing a couple different sizes. So I can print up to, I think 11 by 14 is the largest that I can do on my printer. That's within the 4 by 5 aspect ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking whether I do straight 8 by 10 offerings or I do 8 by 10, 11 by 14, and then outsource 16 by 20s for people who want something a little bit bigger. And then really once I get a new printer, not go any bigger than 20 by 25 or something like that. Still small, and still, or small in comparison to what a lot of what you see in galleries and more popular, so to speak, photographers are selling, or so it seems. But sizable enough that people have the option.
Yeah. Yeah, my printer, the biggest it can do is it uses 24-inch roll paper. And I remember when I first got that printer, some people were saying, why didn't you get the bigger one? Because you can print bigger and this and that. And although that's true, I mean, first of all, that printer would not, the bigger one would not fit in my home office. It just, there was a turn in the hallway. It physically, you could not Tetris that thing into my home office. But I've developed a fondness for the smaller size prints, especially after having done some of the really large prints like that 40 by 50 face mount. And I also had a 30 by 40 inch image that was framed. And that's one that also met the fate of the reciprocating saw.
Yeah, I have a couple 32 by 40s that are luckily not framed, but they're rolled up down in the basement with the others.
Yeah. And it gets to be really cumbersome in terms of shipping and everything else when it comes to the larger stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've taken to the smaller stuff. But if you have the experience of viewing a smaller print, one that's very tastefully framed with a really nice, like a 8-ply mat with some museum glass over the front of it, and just a really simple frame, it places so much more emphasis on the work itself. It seems so much more, it's just a much more intimate experience. I have 3 photos currently hanging in my living room, and they're in frames that were custom made by David over at Saw and Miter.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Oh yeah, beautiful frames.
I've been working with him to get an article up on NPN.
Oh, cool.
Actually,
that'd be a very good perspective.
Yeah, a little bit about his framing and some of his photography as well. But
yeah, that's a good combination to be a very good photographer and also to be very good at making frames.
Oh yeah,
those are 2 skill sets that very few photographers have, both of.
And now apparently he's getting into publishing as well, which is even
cool.
Yeah, but getting off topic. So go back to your.
Yeah, but I have so the frames I have from him, they're the dark walnut. It's a I'm used to seeing these frames for photos where the frames are these big gaudy frames where they just steal all the attention away from the image itself. But I've always preferred the more almost museum presentation where you have the relatively large white mat, you have the print itself, and then a relatively thin frame, but something that's really nice and classy.
Yeah, those are always nice.
Yeah. And it just goes so much nicer with my house than some sort of huge, because I mean, I have a house that was built in the 50s. We put hardwood floors in it, and it has, I guess, a little bit of a kind of a gallery look. We have kind of a light gray walls, but just the way that these framed images stand off the wall, the color of the frames is similar to that of the hardwood floors, and it just pops nicely against it. And I just love the experience and those are 16 by 20 inch prints. But it's such a very intimate experience viewing them, which works really, really well.
What would you say is your best selling size, or two sizes, if you could narrow that down? Just curious.
So I'd say the two are 16 by 20, and then the other is 12 by 15, which sounds like an odd size, and it is. Initially I offered 12 by 15 because I was working with a different printer, and I was printing with the 13 by 19 inch paper.
Right.
And I need to have about a 1/2 inch border around it, which resulted in 12 by 15. And so that was my least expensive and smallest size that I offered. And then above that went up to the 16 by 20, and then it goes up from there. But then I offered 11 by 14 later down the line, and I offer it at the same price as the 12 by 15, with the thought being that they're similar sizes, but 11 by 14, you're not going to need to get a custom frame for it. So that could save some money there.
Yeah. 12 by 15 is what I've always kind of gone for when I was doing those. I think a lot of them downstairs, and then I transitioned to 11 by 14 just because, like you said, the ease of getting a frame. But both of them fit really well in a 16 by 20 frame with a nice mat to it.
Yeah. Also, I should say that I have two more frames from David that I haven't hung yet. I actually ordered them back in early 2020. We all know what happened after that. Because I was going to be doing another art show during the spring of 2020. So I ordered in some frames for some, I think it was 20 by 24 inch prints. I ordered those frames in, and I was going to do the show because I wanted to have something a little bit larger to show. But then, COVID happened, the art show was canceled and everything else. So those frames, I haven't opened them yet. But I've been sitting here, I was sitting over the weekend thinking I really need to hang those up on a dining room wall now. I was hesitant to do so just because I don't necessarily want to look at my own images all day long.
Yeah.
But I've come to terms with the fact that I have not gotten sick of looking at the 3 images that have been on my wall since probably 2018. So 2 more is probably not gonna it's not gonna disturb that. How do you feel about displaying your own work at home?
Kind of like you, I kind of try not to. I mean, let's see, I'm looking around me now, and I have 2 prints of mine on the walls right now. Maybe 3. The rest are from something that I started doing maybe 2 years ago. Is after I made friends with a photographer, or sometimes just outrightly asked because why not, print trades.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I have 3 prints from Joel Truckenbond.
Oh, yeah.
Which absolutely beautiful pieces. And those are just 8 by 10s that we traded. And then I have a platinum palladium triptych that I got from John Foxe Sheets, who is a large format 5x7 photographer.
Oh, cool.
And that is a prized possession because of the fact that, it's a platinum print. So it is just gorgeous. But yeah, I don't know how to feel about hanging my own pieces. Like there's some that I really like, but to be staring at them all the time, I mean that has to be a piece that you are really proud of, because otherwise you're going to start like nitpicking it.
That's what I thought my experience would be when we were deciding which ones to hang in our living room. I had my wife's help to figure out which ones we were going to choose. And it was a very interesting process. And I think it was perhaps a bit of an insight into the process that, people will have when they're choosing which prints to buy. We ended up going with two photos from Death Valley, which is a place that she's never actually been to Death Valley yet. We're thinking about, I was thinking about taking her there this season, but then gas prices went crazy.
Yeah.
But there was a photo of some wildflowers up against some volcanic rock. So it's kind of a dark blue image with little pops of yellow all over it. And that one we chose because it matched a little bit with some of the these yellow flowers that we had in some of the vases on the mantle. And then there was a picture from Death Valley with a clearing storm with some grasses in the foreground. And in that one, also, it was a matter of the color. Some yellow grasses in the foreground, some blues in the sky, which matched some of the yellows and blues that we had in the room. And then the third photo was a image of a frosty maple leaf that's central in the image. And then it's set against some darker blue frosty leaves, and that was taken in Zion. And again, she really liked the color of that one. So it was interesting that it was chosen in many ways because of the aesthetics of the images, versus when people oftentimes buy my prints, I'll sometimes hear the story as to why it is that they chose the particular image they did. And oftentimes when they buy the print, it's because of an emotional connection to the image and something beyond simply the aesthetics of the image. So it was interesting because for me, I have whatever connection to those images in terms of the trips and the mentality and the trips and everything else. So I'll have perhaps an emotional connection to the image. My wife was looking at it from the standpoint of aesthetics, what's going to match what's in the room. And it was very interesting because it dramatically narrowed down the possible images to just a handful. And I walk past those on a daily basis, and I can tell you I have not gotten tired of looking at them, which is a bit of a surprise. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us by email at cody@codyschultz.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.